Become a tech superpower. My name is Nick King. I'm a research fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies, a role I combine with running my own consultancy, former government advisor between 2012 and 2018 when we didn't have a dedicated department to tech and science, and I think it's wonderful we do. It's a very interesting challenge, isn't it, how the UK becomes a tech superpower. I don't actually have the answers, but I'm hoping the panellists joining us today do. We've got an august panel, wonderful people. I will introduce each of them and ask them to make some introductory remarks. We will do some Q&A up on stage, and I will make sure there's plenty of time for questions from the floor. So I'll start with Charlotte Crosswell, if I may. Charlotte is chair of CFIT, the Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology, as well as being a board member at the Centre for Policy Studies, very experienced in fintech in particular. And Charlotte,
great to you. Thank you. And great to see a full room here. So I feel that this is where the buzz is happening in science and tech. So I'm here to represent fintech. So while it may not be in the Secretary of State's department, I do feel that it plays a significant role in our science and tech superpower ambitions because we are already seen as the fintech global leader across the world. CFIT was set up on the back of the Khalifa Review, for anyone who's followed the fintech sector, where Ron Khalifa examined what was needed to drive the sector forward and came to the conclusion that despite there being 27 associations across the UK representing fintech, that we needed another one. And that's because when you sit at the intersection of government, regulators and industry, you need to have someone there who's going to take those difficult tasks, saying, right, government has an ambition, industry has an ambition, but there's no magic team to drive that forward. So we like to think ourselves as that team. And I think it's incredibly important that we do recognise that there is this interplay, particularly in fintech, which is 50% of financially regulated, and to drive it forward. Now, what does the fintech sector need? So it needs to make sure there is dedicated liaison between that. It needs to make sure that obviously government and regulatory ambitions are being driven forward by industry and vice versa. It needs talent. It needs skills and talent. It needs more partnerships, I believe, with the academic sector. It's too often I hear of large-scale fintechs who say, oh, I haven't set up a partnership in the UK. I've gone overseas and got my tech talent, and I've set up a hub down now in Portugal. So I think we do need to drive that forward, Nick, and working that through, because that's really quite key for our next generation and inspiring that generation there. But the fintech sector is very healthy. It's doing incredibly well. But I think it is important that we don't think it's going to be fine as it is. We now need to open up the data to make sure the fintech sector is delivering to consumers and businesses what the technology sector can do. And I think that is incredibly important. So I think really looking forward to Secretary of State's remarks on data and how does the opening up of that data strategy really deliver on a better outcome in financial services.
Thanks, Charlotte. And I think one of the really interesting things there is the consumer-facing angle, because it's quite easy for a lot of this stuff to feel quite esoteric and sort of distant, and actually bringing home the implications for people is a really important challenge, isn't it?
Well, and cost of living, there is, unfortunately, there's so many people who are being disserviced by really thin credit files, credit records that don't actually represent where they are, and therefore they don't have the best savings rates. Yeah. They don't have a mortgage rate. They can't get a step on the housing ladder. And actually, data can help in doing that. And the data strategy, obviously, that we're putting in, I think is incredibly important.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you. Matt Sinclair is an economist and a tech specialist, former number 10 advisor, and I think you've got a new exciting role, haven't you, Matt?
I have indeed, yeah. CCIA is a global association of tech companies which stands for open markets, open networks, open systems, and I'll be incoming to build this out here in the UK.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And please, fire away.
Yeah, so look, I guess I want to start with is a huge amount of starting strength in the UK. So whether it's fintechs, whether it's some of the consumer services being built here, or whether it's our role, which I think is a lot less visible to consumers, in global value chains, whether from semiconductors on down. So we've got those huge strengths. I think crucially, we're also one of the first markets that new digital services tend to launch next. So we tend to get the best of global innovation in digital services because they come here early for all sorts of good reasons. And that's good for British consumers, but crucially it also creates a great flywheel for British tech because they're working with the best tools. They're working with digital tools that we take for granted here that are not always available out there in the wider world. So I think there's this very strong starting position, and I think incremental steps that government is taking to cement that. I think the challenges around regulatory strategy in the end is around the UK, I think, deciding which of these camps we want to be in. Do we want to be in the tech superpower camp, or do we want to be in the, how to put this, tech extraction camp? Do we think that we want to be distinctive for having the most unchecked regulatory power to punish organizations that create successful digital networks? Or do we want to make sure that there are safeguards around how that's used and strengthen that? And I think that's where there will be choice for British policymakers, going forward as they sort of try to decide how do we see tech, and where do we see our place, and do we have our aspirations to be at that top table with global digital services, working with Britain's homegrown successes, but also investing here because that sophisticated domestic market makes this a natural place to build services. But I think one of the challenges can be that these problems seem separate. Regulation of the market on the consumer side and industrial policy people think about as separate. But actually, it's that sophistication of Britain as either a business user or a consumer market which makes us an exciting place to build new services. And I think that's what is going to lead to an important regulatory debate, just to add on to some of the other topics I'm sure we'll come on to in this talk.
Great, super, thanks, Matt. I think another interesting part that's implicit in your comments is just the need to sort of choose, make some decisions and not sort of boil the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. There are going to be some cakes we can't have and eat, right? And I think that's going to be the challenge with tech policy is that up till now we haven't had to make some of those choices because they were left to the EU or there was status quo policy. But now that new policy is being formed, and I think the Digital Markets Act, the DMCC, our equivalent of the EU Digital Markets Act, is the big example here. I think the UK is starting to become distinctive for the wrong reasons, and I think that's going to be where there's going to be a course correction in the next few years.
Fantastic, thank you. Next we have Chris Hayward. Chris is Policy Chairman at the City of London Corporation, and the City of London Corporation are kindly sponsoring this event, so thank you very much for your support, Chris, and great to have you on the panel, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick, and can I start by thanking my fellow panellists for giving up their time and saying how pleased I am that the Secretary of State has been able to join us, and we shall really look forward to hearing her contribution. And we're delighted to be partnering, Nick, with the Centre for Policy Studies on this absolutely critical topic of how we make the United Kingdom a tech superpower. And I just really wanted to make three very brief points at the start of this panel. The first one is simply that digital tech and AI revolution is happening globally. And what's important for me out of all this is that the United Kingdom should aim to be not a world leader, but the world leader in all of this. And I think we can do that. We have a real opportunity to shape the digital world by pioneering a data-driven economic transformation. So I do welcome this government's moves in this area, particularly things like the Online Safety Bill, which is awaiting royal assent, and indeed the upcoming Prime Minister's AI Summit, which is going to be taking place in the city. Second point I just wanted to make is that technology can contribute, I think, strongly to economic growth. One of the things we've done in the City of London Corporation is just launched a report called Vision for Economic Growth, a roadmap to prosperity. And it's all about how financial and professional services can help our country unlock investment and economic growth through 2030 and beyond the life of just one parliament. And I'm at all the party conferences trying to persuade politicians to put some of this into your manifestos for the next general elections. It's a whole load of practical steps, 9 big moves that, if implemented, we're arguing could add some £225 billion of investment growth to the UK economy by 2030. And the good news, and I say this in the Secretary of State's presence, is there's no need for any primary legislation, Secretary of State. There is no need for a Whitehall shake-up of departments, and there's very little cost involved. So what is not to like? We hope you'll at least read the report. And hopefully enacting widespread digital verification, for example, could benefit businesses and consumers, we say, by up to £4.8 billion by by 2030, which will of course include, and this is an important point, fraud losses, which we want to eliminate in the city, and we have responsibilities, I think you know, for economic crime, the lead force for economic crime. And thirdly, I just want to touch on regulation, because regulation needs to keep pace with digital revolution. We need to keep, I would suggest, our high regulatory standards, but at the same time, we need to regulate in an agile and innovative and a proportionate way. And that's really important, because regulation, of course, should always be about ultimately protecting consumers, compliance, but it mustn't stifle innovation. And we've seen in the Financial Services and Markets Act the competitiveness clause, which is built into regulators now, secondary objective, but we really want to see regulators actually across the whole scene, not just in financial services, working together. That's absolutely critical as we move into this, this digital age, as it were. So we would like to see the UK as a tech superpower. I was really pleased to hear the Chancellor talking about this in his speech to conference as well today, and I hope we'll have some really good discussions about it this afternoon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And our final speaker is the Secretary of State, and I'll echo Chris's thanks for joining us, Michelle. It's a great pleasure for us to have you, and a great honour as well. You are formerly Culture Secretary, very briefly Education Secretary, and a Universities Minister, and the first ever Science and Tech Minister, which is brilliant. You've launched the department, and it's been quite a few months, hasn't it? And there's been a lot of progress made in a lot of areas, but there's sort of no shortage of things to do. So over to you. Thank you, Michelle.
Indeed, thank you very much, Nick, and of course, thank you for CPS for holding today and the City of London for sponsoring. I was really excited when I saw this agenda for this fringe, because it's the bread and butter of my department. My department is on a mission to ensure that the UK becomes a science and technology superpower by 2030, and we're going to do that by working hand in hand with industry. And first of all, I think we shouldn't overlook the importance of the Prime Minister establishing a bespoke department for science and technology. That really does mean that we can drive stuff forward from the centre, which has happened in a remarkable speed if we look at what my department has achieved in the last 8 months and what more we've got to come on the horizon. The thing that we've also tried to do really differently, I was quite passionate about bringing in external expertise. You know, despite what some people might tell you, government does not know all the answers, especially when it comes to this agenda. And that's why we brought in loads of secondees from industry, why we've got a world-class board that we've set up. It's why we set up an expert advisory panel to work with the AI task force, some of the best and the brightest from across the globe, to ensure that we really put a rocket up this agenda and deliver. And in all my conversations with industry and with researchers and academics, trying to understand, okay, what is really holding us back from going to that next level? Because actually, we are achieving fantastic things. As a country, we're one of only 3 in the world to have a $1 trillion tech industry. That is a massive achievement. We're only beaten by China and America. But we now need to move us beyond the challenger stage to the next level. And that's going to be quite tricky. So what are the things that are holding us back? And I would argue that we've got all the right ingredients, but we just need to double down on that ingredients. So in particular, skills. We are awash with talent. We've got 4 out of the top 10 universities. We've got fantastic programs, but we particularly need to ensure that we're reskilling and upskilling our workforce, which traditionally hasn't been what we're good at as a nation, if we're honest. Traditionally, we've been very good at people being educated to the age of about 21, 22, and then it's almost job done. And over the last few years as a government, we've been trying to turn that on its head by doing things like boot camps, later stage apprenticeships, launching LLE in 2 years' time, which will ensure that people can do a more modularised education system. And then the second area that I think we need to focus on is scale up. We're really good in this country at start-up, but we struggle a little bit at scale up. Now, we've been getting better, and we've got lots of initiatives to support that area, like the Chancellor's Mansion House reforms, like stuff in my own department, like digital growth grants, where we're using Barclays Eagle Labs. There's a wash of different schemes and initiatives. So that's an area of particular focus for me. And then the third area is one that was touched upon by, I think, most of the panelists, which is regulation. My mantra is really regulate to innovate. I think that we should use regulation in a very Thatcherite way, if we're honest, because actually regulation can be a tool for good. If we provide business with the rules of the road, the framework, the certainty, that long-term path, they can base themselves here, they can grow here, they know what they're expecting. But it's got to be agile and it's got to be nimble. And that's certainly been our approach on AI. And just before I finish, I do think the other answer to this question is leaning into AI. It is going to be transformative. It is one of our 5 key critical technologies that we've identified as a government. And what we're saying is the country that leads on AI safety will be the country that manages to lead on AI. And that's why I think it's so important that we can seize the opportunities of AI, that we can ensure that our public services are accessing this technology, etc. But we do have to grip the challenges, and that's what the summit is about this year, and I'm sure we will get onto that topic later. So it's an incredibly exciting agenda, but it's more than just a hypothetical. It's actually what my department is driving forward to do. We're on a mission to make the UK a science and tech superpower.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Secretary of State. A lot of interesting topics have come up there already. Role of data, regulatory approach, capital, finance, making sure that gets to the right companies, and talent. There's no shortage of issues, and lots of those issues actually are not sort of particular to the tech sector. No. One of the things I was sort of thinking about in advance of this is that regulatory approach, because we're not talking about our regulator whose levers you can pull as Secretary of State. We're talking about regulatory approach right across the board, right? Because tech is cross-cutting. So, one of the things that I think is true of government, I don't think it's an original observation, is that it's very easy for it to be quite siloed and departments to do their thing. How, as DSIT, are you able to ensure that that mantra of yours, regulate to innovate, isn't just a DSIT mantra, it's a sort of government-wide ambition?
Well, I think one thing we need to remember is it isn't just the regulation that's important, it's the regulatory behaviour as well, and making sure that our regulators are working together. Too often, I hear from industry that, especially in certain areas where they are trying to answer to different regulators, when they ask this, one question, they get different answers back, and that's incredibly frustrating and is curtailing and limiting the opportunities of business. So we need to make sure that our regulators are acting in a coordinated fashion, and that's why you'll be seeing more from my department coming out about sandboxes, etc., across the areas that we represent, and why, of course, we work very closely with DBT and other ministries, because this is, as you say, more of a cross-government agenda than just unique to my own department.
Fantastic, thank you. Matthew, I'd like you to sort of think back to your sort of time in government. Sort of similar sort of question, really, about whether that regulatory approach, was it something you saw? Was it working?
Look, I think one of the things to understand is that regulators will work best when they're given a clear sense of a public-facing objective by ministers. Right? What will end badly is when there is a sense this problem is hard, and so what we're going to do is we're going to hand it off to a regulator. And I think that what will work best is when they're given a clear mandate. And I think that a good example of this would be in the new Digital Markets Bill. I think there's more clarity that can be added on, and it can be more than to emphasise the first standard here should be the consumer interest, right? That what any competition law should be intended to do and should be mandated to do is make sure that any interventions are in the overall interests of consumers, looking at that big picture. So I think the second is when they've got proper external scrutiny and checks. There's no organisation if sort of left to its own devices making, I think increasingly political decisions, which it's inevitably going to make once it's getting into, the distributions that take place within digital platforms. No organisation is going to be healthy if it's kind of left on its own. And I think that it's a bit worrying that it's having both its tribunal oversight watered down, and it's having fewer checks in terms of being forced to consider consumer interests properly. It's almost like, because I think nimble, you're absolutely right, nimble is the priority, but I think there's nimble in terms of I'm going to quickly open the door and get through. There's nimble, I'm going to smash straight through and keep going. And I think that we're kind of getting the latter with the way the Digital Markets Bill is coming together. And I think, fortunately, what's great is that it's currently out for report stage. It's a great moment, I think, for people to step back, consider amendments, think about ways that they can really get that bill in a place where, as you say, the UK can lead as a regulator versus becoming, you know, a bit of a warning sign.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think actually, in many ways, we are leading, aren't we? And so you sort of said we're the third biggest tech economy in the world. That is, yeah, it's a great position to be in, and in some respects, probably already are a tech superpower. And then, you know, I sort of think about fintech, which is something that we are, I think, widely regarded as being a world leader in. But as you know, Charlotte, the fintech community sort of feels like there's a bit of competition for that, and it's sort of waning a little bit. So, just like to pick up on the fintech part in particular, where that's in the shape it should be, and where we can sort of make advancements.
I mean, I try to now talk about financial innovation rather than just fintech, because fintech, I think, doesn't really show really what's happening within financial services and the innovation in financial services, whether that's your banking app, whether it's your wealth management apps, your budgeting apps for kids, et cetera, et cetera. So if we look at how do we innovate financial services, I think it's easier to resonate with people rather than just sort of put it in the Shoreditch bucket. And I think you're right. What we're seeing is the fintech sector is a very interconnected ecosystem. So it reminds me of Cambridge back in the late 90s and the tech days. Everyone talks to everyone in fintech. Everybody knows everybody in fintech. Government and regulators highly engaged on it as well. So that's great. So we've got an ecosystem really connected. But when you have that, you obviously have then a lot of people saying, well, we need to do more, and we need to go faster. So that's probably just because industry is so close to government and regulators, they're able to say, look, we can go and deliver this. And so I think where we got to out of the Khalifa Review, which was now published, come out to 3 years ago, which is amazing, and also was written during COVID, so identified issues that maybe not so much of an issue now, but were back at the time, is saying, right, how do we take that forward? And a lot of people will say, I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention it around here, but should we have a digital ID? And I think we've just got to, at some point, make that decision. And a lot of people would say, does that mean I've got to carry an ID card? No, but what about if you had an ID that allowed you to switch from bank to bank or fintech to here, or you're able to see everything you need from your investments or your mortgage? Then I think people would see it very differently. So digital verification that Chris mentioned. So where the fintech sector is, it's saying we have the capacity to do more. We know we can deliver more innovation, and back to my consumers and small businesses, we will deliver better products and services. So one, tell us what you'd like, but also give us the space, and the regulatory sort of framework to go and do that. And the Data Protection Digital Information Bill is quite key to that, because that's going to open up data that people haven't had before. And it's data sets and APIs. It sounds very techy, but it's really not. It's actually saying, give the power of data to the person whose data it is, and allow someone to go and do a better job with that data than you can do on your own. And that's got to be a good thing. So that's really where we're seeing the big drivers, I think, coming in from the sector. And that leads us into not just open banking, which we lead across the world in, open finance and open data. And I think that is going to drive the next wave of financial innovation forward. So fintech sectors, they're sort of, they want to consume the data, because with more data they can build more products and services and deliver on, not just a government strategy, but industry strategy as well. So I suppose the only thing I'd slightly disagree is I'm not sure we necessarily need the government mandate to go and do it, because I think industry actually, alongside regulators, can drive a lot of this forward. But sometimes I find them a bit hesitant. So we'll wait for government to tell us what they want.
The regulators?
Well, and industry as well.
Right.
And I think actually industry and regulators in many cases have 90% of the answers there already.
Yeah.
So our superpower is, as I said, interconnecting that and saying, let's go and drive it forward, direction of travel, and move quickly.
Yeah, I suppose the theory is that regulators sort of take their signals from government, and then that clause we talked about around competitiveness, I think is sort of seen as a very important one. And there is a general challenge, I think, about whether regulators are as minded to innovate as they might be. That customer safety, security thing, it's very important, but sometimes there's a trade-off, and whether they get the balance right, I think.
It's hugely important, but why does every financial regulator in the world come to the UK and say, how have you done fintech? Or they read the reviews, we're going to copy that, and then they put it in legislation really quickly. And the fintech sector says, how do they move so quickly? Because you've basically given them the blueprint of how to do it.
Yeah.
So I think we have made incredible advances on it, but now we can accelerate even more.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, tell us a bit more about sort of the City of London's interest in this area, because in many respects, the City of London we're seen as relatively traditional in some of its respects, but actually you're really leading into this, right? So tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I think you've already heard that London is one of the most successful countries for fintech, startups in particular, more unicorns than anywhere else in Europe, and great opportunities. But you'd expect me probably, and I will, say a word about how we fund these high-growth British businesses, because the challenge, and I think the Secretary of State put this absolutely right, is that we're really good at start-up technology businesses. We're really bad at scaling up. We know we're not seeing the number of IPOs on the London Stock Exchange that we used to see. We know that that's because we've not got the capital flows to actually fund these. And so the Mansion House Compact and the reforms, Chancellor's reforms, I think are incredibly important here, because if we can redirect 5%, just 5% of DC pensions into an ultimate fund or an ultimately pot of some £50 billion to invest in British businesses, instead of losing that talent, instead of losing those tax receipts, instead of losing those businesses to other parts of the world, particularly across the Atlantic, we can keep them here in the United Kingdom. And that's why I think this is potentially a breakthrough. And if we can follow through on the compact, which is a letter of intent at this stage, but nevertheless 9 big companies signed up to it, if we can fund these businesses here in the UK, we can keep them in the UK and we can grow them in the UK.
Well, that sounds like an important challenge. And as you say, people have been talking about sort of Solvency II reform for a long time, but it does feel like we're sort of finally making progress, and the Chancellor's sort of very keen to unlock that funding pool. Secretary of State, I'm interested. We talked a little bit about the sort of need to choose, and there's lots of technology, lots of different opportunities, lots of different areas to focus on. But I was wondering if we sort of come back to the technology and just think about where the UK sort of sees its sort of strategic advantage being, and perhaps which technologies we just say, actually, that's not for us right now. Is there that thinking at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we are being strategic because that is how we're going to be effective, and that's why we've identified 5 critical technologies. So future telecoms, which basically underpins everything, doesn't it, if we're going to actually succeed. Then we've also identified AI, which we spoke a little bit about before, quantum and compute, and semiconductors. So when you think about semiconductors, semiconductor is in most devices that you have. So what we try to do is identify those ones where we have a bit of a strategic advantage, or they're absolutely important and imperative to us becoming a tech superpower. But that's not the limit of our ambition. So my department, for example, works across space and life sciences and other areas which we are in many ways world leading in already as well.
And not something I'm particularly familiar with, but hopefully you can tell us a bit more about it. This exascale computer that we're buying that costs almost £1 billion. What's that going to do? How's that going to sort of turbocharge our ambitions?
So compute power basically will allow us to advance in AI, etc. And what we've done so far on this is we've pumped just over 200 million into Bristol to start this up, to have an AI research resource, and then the rest is just over 900 million that the Chancellor announced, which is called an exascale programme. Now, that is quite special because, yes, there's a lot of private companies around the world that are investing in compute, because you need that compute capability to be able to do some of the things that we've been talking about today. But if you compare us to America, the American government themselves are not investing in it like we are. So it shows that we really are on the front foot, and we do really mean business when we say we want to be a tech superpower.
And I'm told by clever people that that's the hardware, and then there's a big question about sort of the software that follows. Is the idea that the market takes care of that, or is that something where government needs to?
So with everything, we're working hand in hand with industry, and so we don't compare ourselves to the likes of Microsoft, etc. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have the capability as a government to gain some national sovereignty in these areas, that we can ensure that our public services benefit from these technologies, and that we work with industry, and we're also giving and ensuring that industry has the infrastructure and setup as well to grow here in the UK.
Brilliant, thank you. Matt, what do you think we can learn from what we're seeing around the world? What are other places doing well that we should actually, perhaps we should just copy a little bit of it?
Well, I think that what we're seeing around the world is that every single country is going to wrestle through some version of these regulatory questions, right? Like everyone is going to work through this. And the UK, there's areas where the UK's been doing this a long time. Financial regulation being one, and therefore there is just a different kind of relationship between industry and regulator, which, to be fair, was born in an awful lot of strife and challenge, a while back, right? But I think that what we'll find is do we put in place, you'll see plenty of countries which are putting in place these institutions as a way of, we're going to create a regulatory structure which can reward, one vested interest after another, and it becomes, these regulators are going to go into battle for one business group or another. And you find others who are trying to put in place a regulatory structure that will last and that will produce decisions that last. And I think that at times, the danger is that haste. Is trying to get in place a regulatory structure which emphasises haste, which emphasises getting rid of some of the kind of institutional checks and balances, some of the adversarial quality even in our competition system, which has worked for such a long time. And I think that there is a risk that if you lose some of those kind of features of Britain's regulatory system, then we lose that. And I think that if you look internationally, the big difference between what the UK is doing and what other countries are doing is that other countries are generally saying, if you are a certain kind of company doing a certain kind of service, you'll be subject to a certain kind of regulation. I think the risk is when we start to depart from that and say that we're going to let the regulator kind of come up with an answer for each individual case, and that answer, is, you then end up with a huge amount of economic control, and I think you inevitably politicise the regulators. Because what I think no one wants is for us to be in a situation sort of 10 years from now where ministers are being told, sorry, you can't do that. The regulator gets to make that decision. The regulator gets to make that decision. I think that ensuring that you have that system where regulators work to work, stay in their lane, deliver where they need, deliver interventions where they need to, and are responding to an overarching kind of political commitment to the consumer interest. I think that's when you'll get the best outcomes.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the most live regulatory thorny issues right now is AI, right?
Yeah.
Like, how are we going to deal with that? And the AI Summit is an opportunity for us to shape some thinking around that, hopefully with international partners. So can you sort of expand on that a little bit, Michelle, and particularly the international opportunity there?
Yeah, so we're doing things a little bit differently to some other countries, in particular the EU, when it comes to AI. So what you've seen happen in the EU is they've really rushed to legislate before they've really understood the problem. They tried to inject a solution, which means that they're already stifling innovation in an area that really has the potential to transform our lives. And that's not what we want to do. What we have set out earlier this year in the white paper that we published was the principles that we want our regulators to work to, because we don't want them all going off on different tangents. We want that consistency, that coordination. We want to give industry the rules of the road, to know the direction and that long-term certainty. But we also want them to be agile and nimble, because it is a transformative but also an emerging technology. And the other thing that we've said is that actually let's get to grips with what the risks really are. Let's try and understand this. And so we've set up an AI Frontier Task Force where we've got some of the best and the brightest minds, people like Yoshua Bengio. These are people which are known as the godfather of AI. So they are big deals in the sector. And we've managed to pull that top talent into the UK to really examine that question. What are the risks? How can we gain national sovereignty? How can we get that real opportunities into our public services? And then the other thing that we're doing is holding this AI Safety Summit. So it's the first ever global summit on frontier AI. So there's been lots of conversations about AI, lots of different forums across the globe, like the Global Partnership on AI, like the Hiroshima process, but none of them are looking at frontier AI. Now, frontier AI is basically that AI that's at the cutting edge, so really, really on the cusp of technological breakthroughs and at that very forefront in AI. And
So this is all going beyond generative AI, beyond the chat GPT in terms
well,
of
it
you.
includes that, and then it also will include the next set of models and what will lie beyond that.
Right.
And that's where some of the risks are as well. We've outlined them falling into two categories broadly. One is bad actors gaining control, so it could include cyber attacks, it could include bio threats, etc. And then also loss of control, because we're learning so much about this technology. And that global conversation on that area has never happened. In fact, we've got some countries that are quite far behind on even thinking about these risks, but also these opportunities. So what we're doing is bringing global leaders around the table to have a very focused conversation on the risks of frontier AI, but also the opportunities, because they're two sides of the same coin. And to be able to seize those opportunities, you've got to grip those risks. And we strongly believe that we should be getting those opportunities. The opportunities, especially in things like healthcare and transport, are phenomenal. Yeah. And we're already seeing some of that, like the detection of breast cancer early, the detection of lung cancer early. That's already happening now today in our NHS. Yeah. But in the future, it's going to be even more miraculous, but only if we can, of course, grip those risks. And then alongside that, we're having lots of conversations and doing a lot of work on the other risks, if you like. So things that you might read about quite a lot in the media, things like AI bias, things like deepfakes, all of the kind of very topical risks that come about. How can we prepare our workforce, things like this. So it's not that the government is only focusing on one area, but it's that we're trying to really get to grips with these things and in the right way and bring the rest of the world with us.
Brilliant, thank you. One of the things that I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but is a really important challenge is adoption. Because it's great having this technology, but actually sort of mainstreaming it is quite difficult. Matt,
although I would add on that, actually, if think about technology sort of in decades past, it would have sat in a lab for a really long time, or it would have sat in sort of a few companies or governments that could afford it. I think one of the things that's really exciting about particularly the public cloud infrastructure that's developed is that cutting-edge tech is finding its way, for consumer use and small, medium enterprise use faster than it ever has before. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity. It does mean we need to think about those risks, earlier, because it isn't going to sit in a lab as long. But there is absolutely a market which is working to get those services out and available on a remarkably level basis across the market. And I think that that just didn't exist in previous waves of technological innovation, and it should mean it can get embodied faster. But obviously, what we then need to think about is the capacities people can respond and take advantage of that. And I think we just shouldn't lose sight. Absolutely need to be thinking about the risks, but also really just appreciating the benefits and the fact those benefits can diffuse faster than they have in the past. Because there never used to be these services that would just put this cutting-edge tech out there for smaller businesses to access on their own terms and use.
Yeah, the market might well look after it. I'm going to do a quick experiment. Who in the audience uses AI in their day-to-day work in any way? Wow, that's quite a lot, but I suppose we do have a slight vested crowd here, don't we? People who actually understand tech. Okay, great. Now that you're all in the habit of putting your hands up, I'm going to start coming to the audience for some questions, and we're going to take 2 or 3 at a time. Have we got some mics, and where are the mics? Sorry. We will start with some questions at the back, if that's where the mics are. Sorry. So there's one gentleman, second back row, thank you, and then lady here. Yeah, thanks. If you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, Nick Wooddow from Spelthorne. I'd like to just look at one of the successes of fintech, which is open banking, or could be better. Last December, I attended an excellent seminar in the Guildhall, which Chris supported and Charlotte spoke at. So can I ask, what in your view is the future for open banking?
Excellent, thank you. I think that will be a Charlotte-Chris combo, and then a lady here, please. Yeah, you, thank you.
Speakers and the audience, good evening. I just want to ask one thing for AI industry.
Sorry, would you mind just introducing yourself?
Excuse me, hello, I'm Sandra. And for AI industry, graphical cards are crucial to AI or even the AI application on fintech. But the demands of graphical cards outstrips the supply globally. So without graphical cards, actually, we can do nothing. So what can the government do to help the British enterprises to get enough graphical cards? And because the major manufacturers of graphical cards are American companies, and they may give priorities to the order of American AI industry over the British one.
All clear. So it's graphical cuts.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Matt, that sounds like a good one for Matt. Right, open banking, what more can we do? Charlotte Crisp.
So it's quite funny. So I chaired the open banking entity before I took this role, and I sometimes feel I talk more about open banking now I've left open banking than when I did, and that's because open banking was a competition remedy, and I was the trustee for the CMA, and so we were very limited in, while we actually set the blueprint for everyone globally, we were very limited in what we could do, because if it wasn't in the order, we couldn't work on it. So I just kept turning down people, and they'd say, but surely you must be doing it. So now I'm out, I'm a bit more free, and we've already announced that we're looking at open finance. So what's happening at the moment is the Joint Regulatory Oversight Committee, FCA PSR, is driving that forward and working out a new entity. That is going to give us crucial foundations for the expansion of open banking into open finance, into open data, and I think that's what's going to unlock it. I think what's interesting is, since I left, of just how many international hubs call me up around the world and say, we need a global leader in these standards. Because they've adopted it, but we'll all open source our standards. So perhaps now, not just exporting thought leadership, I think there is something to be done on exporting standards and law and making this actually something where we can be really internationally competitive. But yeah, big, as I said, investors interested in making it move forward, but just incredible just how that's helping everybody just ease their path of financial services now.
Brilliant, thank you. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Charlotte's the expert on open banking. But look, Nick, it's very important. It's still moving forward. We hosted that round table for you back last year. We're going to do another one, I think, for you this year. We're talking about it. Well, we're going to potentially talk about it. Shaking his head. But we will continue to be committed. And in fact, I'm meeting with the open banking people tomorrow afternoon to get the latest update on what's happening.
Brilliant, thank you. And Matt, I'm so grateful that you know what a graphical cut is.
Graphics cards, so GPUs. I think the question is about GPUs, essentially. And so I think the thing I would just emphasize is that no country makes truly cutting-edge semiconductors. They are the products of international value chains where, the role of ASML in the Netherlands or Carl Zeiss in Germany or, ARM here in the UK, like all of these different companies are contributing to that global supply chain. And I think a lot of the time, what we've seen over the past few years is that industry has done an absolutely amazing job of delivering in response to really sharp changes in demand. We all think there was this big semiconductor shortage during COVID. Actually, more chips were made that year than any other year ever. The problem is that this demand you've got these incredibly large investments being made in incredibly complex supply chains to respond to often quite sharp changes in demand. And that means that there will sometimes, that industry won't be able to keep up. But I think that in the end, what we've seen, there are countries, I'm not going to name them, there are countries trying to create their own domestic supply chains because in the search of autonomy, and it's not working. It's been a pretty big, it's been a disaster. These are larger countries than the UK, right? And it's not working. What is working, I think, is that collaborative global value chain. And I think that where the stress point right now, absolutely, as you say, cutting-edge GPUs, which are used in training large language models. I think the danger of government, suppose Michelle decided to, okay, we need to build a UK industry to build, GPUs for large language models is A, probably can't. No country can. The US can't do this genuinely do this on its own to the cutting edge. But secondly, by the time we succeed, you'll probably find the shortages somewhere else, and we're feeding capacity into a glut. So I think there is just a need to respect. The right question for the UK is, where can we play an exciting role with collaborating with allies, with commercial partners globally, in global value chains, rather than kind of how can we fight our allies? Because in the end, we'll just all lose if we go down that path.
Yeah, and that's what we've tried to do in semis, isn't it? Because you're quite right. So our USP or our expertise is more in the research and design area. So that's the particular area that we're focusing on, and we want to grow, rather than trying to kid ourselves that we can do the whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There was a sort of race for building fabs and things, wasn't there? And you just need to know where your particular strength is. And yeah. Excellent. Okay, some more questions. We are going to come down here, if that's okay, and we'll go gentleman in the waistcoat, maybe? Gilet. And then the lady in front of him, and then the chap in the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Jonathan Smith. I run a cybersecurity company called Cybersmith. I'll let the people in the room guess where we came up with that name from. I believe as a small C conservative that one of the key roles of government is to protect us from foreign actors. And I believe that one of the things that government is currently failing to do in terms of protecting us from foreign actors is from what are often called advanced persistent threats, or as a slightly less jargonistic term, this is foreign states attacking British companies. And my question to the panel is, it's all well and good us becoming a tech superpower, but if the government is not protecting that technology and that IP, there's no point in us spending millions and millions of researching stuff only for the Chinese to steal the IP or the Iranians to try and destroy it. And I appreciate that both of those are not friendly nations to us, but I can assure you if the Iranians were sending bombs through the post, it would be front page news. But what they are doing is destroying companies, destroying data. A company in my area that employs several hundred people folded because of a cyber attack recently. I don't feel like this is taken very seriously. I'd love the panel's reaction to that. Thank you.
Great, we'll come to you on that, if that's okay, Michelle. Thank you. Lady in front.
Hi, my name is Melissa Lawford. I'm an economics reporter at The Telegraph. Michelle, you mentioned that a lot of the companies that you're talking to are saying they're getting different verdicts from regulators. In your view, why are regulators giving contradictory views? What's causing that? Is it ultimately that we have too many different regulators in this field?
Should I start with that one? Yeah.
I will just take this gentleman, if that's okay. And then, thank you. It'd be great if it's not.
Thank you. Andy Sellers from the Compound Semiconductor Applications Catapult. So I'm delighted that the panel is so keenly talking about semiconductors. I've got a very positive story and a question associated with it. So I was recently out in Taiwan. We took out 12 startups and 8 large companies. We had the UK's first ever pavilion in Semicon Taiwan. It was absolutely unique because the UK was selling innovation. It was totally recognised. Now, as a slight side to that, there was a kind of a view that the UK was going to do the innovation, but that the scale up and the economic value would be captured in Taiwan. So I'm just really interested to know exactly this Mansion House report, will that be sufficient to enable us, or what other views do we have about how we actually capture the value from that innovation in the UK?
Fantastic. I might come to you on that, if that's okay, Chris, but we'll start with Michelle with the other couple of questions.
So on the regulator point, I was particularly talking about AI, and our response to that was establishing those principles with the white paper to ensure that we could get all regulators working to those same principles. And I think that was because it's such an emerging technology. And of course, regulators had to get equipped, get the skills, and they still do to a certain extent, and get their heads around this technology. And so it's not surprising that you saw a bit of a situation where regulators were reacting differently to it. And that's why we stepped in and established those principles that they could all work to and sing from the same hymn sheet, so the business knew exactly what they could expect if they located or wanted to grow here in the UK. And that's why we are particularly working on sandbox initiatives. It's why we commissioned Balance to do a review into this area, because we do think that the regulatory environment and the behaviour of our regulators really is part of the key to enabling innovation and growth, including in my areas, but also across the economy at large. Then on the other point about cyber, I mean, I would refute that because, as I said, the document that we published just last week, I believe it was, around the AI Summit did establish, as I did before, that two of the broad areas of risk from frontier AI, one of them very much about bad actors getting control of that technology and that leading to things like cyber attacks. And as I said, we're the only country in the world that has convened the other countries on this very topic and is trying to address it head on and be proactive rather than reactive. So I think we are taking this seriously. It's at the top of my agenda.
Thank you. And we can talk a little bit about how we capture the value out of semiconductors, in particular, Chris, and the potential from the accord.
And the Mansion House reforms. Well, look, I mean, the Mansion House reforms and the funding that they could drive, I think very much the sort of thing you're talking about in British inventions, putting money into British business. For me, if those funds, which incidentally, I think we've underperformed on our savers' performance in pensions for many years now. If you look at the super funds in Australia and Canada, why haven't we been doing some of this stuff? That means a slightly different approach to risk, if I may say so. And the word risk has always been considered a bit of a dirty word in the past 10 years. I think we've got to get to a position where responsible risk-taking is actually important. And I think savers should have higher returns, and it shouldn't be about keeping the fees to the lowest, it should be about getting the highest returns we can. And if we can feed those funds from the Mansion House Compact, Mansion House reforms into British businesses, and for me they have to be British businesses, and to inventions that we can export across the globe, that would be great, and I hope we can.
It is extraordinary, isn't it, how we, British companies, equities, infrastructure is funded by Australian, Canadian pension funds, but our own pension funds can't or won't touch it.
Big opportunity for us now to change that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you. There were some questions down here, I appreciate it. So a couple of chaps next to each other and one in front.
Hi, I'm Gene Burris. I'm here on behalf of the Coalition for App Fairness. A question about regulatory choices in particular, and the use of the word superpower. I think today maybe the sole superpower when it comes to technology would be considered Silicon Valley, largely due to the existence of companies like Apple and Google that sit there and hold a great deal of power, who to some degree owe their existence to a decisive regulatory intervention by the United States, who took the lead in the late 1990s and early 2000s to restrain the then dominant digital platform. Is the choice today for the UK either to take the lead with a decisive and effective DMCC bill that gives them a chance to take the lead on this generation of regulatory constraint, or the choice, if they fail in that regard, may be to be a vassal state instead of a superpower and a vassal of the current Silicon Valley companies rather than charting their own path?
Okay, thank you. Matt, I might come to you on
sure,
that. That's okay. Yeah. Sorry, chap next to first. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hamza. I'm a computer science student. And my question is in regards to the voice synthesizers for AI. AI can copy someone's voice after listening to it for a few seconds. And that's unfortunately been used for deception and ransom. I'd like to hear your opinions on how the government should tackle that problem.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, great. And yeah.
Hello there. My name is Patrick Cusworth. I work in science policy and communications. I've spoken to many clients in the science sector who really welcome and are very relieved to hear about the government's re-entry and associate membership of the Horizon funding system. This is really great news, particularly in terms of not just being able to access new funding, but also being part of future partnerships and accessing networks. My question is, what are the government's plans in terms of moving beyond this, in terms of other partnerships and other networks that can be taken, that we can utilise beyond that of the EU? Are there any other networks, other partnerships that we can look to develop with partners in America, Canada, Australia, and other science nations and other scientific superpowers?
Okay, Okay, so what comes beyond Horizon? Okay, thank you. We'll start with the, start with you, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a really long history of dynamic competition in digital platform markets, and there's no sign that it's ended. In recent years, look at the dramatic growth of TikTok, for example. Look at what's been going on in the digital ads market, where we've got new entrants almost daily, right? So Netflix and Disney, not small companies, able to handle that, hold their own, coming into that digital ad market, which is foundational to so many other digital business models. So you've got this long history of dynamic competition, and this idea that it might have sort of ended unless regulators take over and run competition. There's one, some of the economists who kind of pioneered platform economics called it the end of history illusion. That up till now, we've had one wave after another of disruptors, but now that can't possibly happen. There's an unreality about that. And I think the danger with the kind of intervention you're talking about is that the CMA steps in on the basis of thinking, which you can see this in the impact assessment that's been done on DMCC, on the basis of this thought process, which doesn't take the role of competition between the large digital platform companies seriously. So what it's missing is that you can ossify the market by stepping in and treating, for example, the fact that one digital platform company in e-commerce is tearing strips off another in search is good news. That is how competition is happening in these digital platform markets. But if you step in and make it harder for these digital platform companies to create new services, to innovate, there's both an immediate loss to consumers from the regulatory delay, but there's a longer term loss of actual competition because you're undermining the process by which these companies enter each other's markets. And at the same time, of course, as we kind of mentioned in my introductory remarks, the UK no longer becomes where you can get the very best digital services to build your startup or your scaling business. So, finance is another example. Like, there's a whole toolkit which firms need when they're going to make an industry, when they're going to enter a market. One of those is good digital tools. Another is finance. And if the UK no longer has the best of that, because we make it harder to enter, because you have this regulatory sword of Damocles hanging above people building successful digital networks, I think that is going to, in the end, undermine competition. It will ossify competition. And over time, you will then have, people will then look at this digital market and say, we need regulators to intervene. And I think that self-fulfilling prophecy is what really makes me nervous. When I saw the DMCC come through, sort of went in there sort of eager to compare and contrast with what the EU had done, it just really struck me that the sheer amount of power being given to the CMA, I think there's going to need to be a stepping in the coming months by government, by backbenchers, by the Lords, to just put some constraints around that so that those powers are used responsibly and they're used in the consumer interest. And I think if you do that, it will not make, I won't fall in love with the bill, but it will take a lot of the fear factor out for people, which I think is really important to the UK still staying at that cutting edge.
Thanks, Matt. Especially at a time where the CMA is sort of looking increasingly assertive in all sorts of things.
No one's looking at the CMA right now and thinking, these people are just, if left to their own devices, going to use these powers extremely cautiously. And so I think that if all that external sort of check does is give people confidence this structure will be used responsibly, I think that's great.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Michelle, voice fakes and Beyond Horizon.
Yeah, so with the voice issue, so I was, before this role, Secretary of State for DCMS. So fully aware this is a particular concern of the creative sector and specifically very much in the music industry. And that's a sector that we've been talking to very closely over the last few months, working with Lucy Fraser in DCMS, trying to establish a code of practice that we can get agreement from the AI world and also agreement from the creative sector as well. And we will get there before Christmas in this area. And also, don't forget, there are lots of technologies that are going to come on stream that will actually begin to be the solutions to this. So if you talk to a number of AI companies, they're working at the moment on specific watermarks as well that will help provide some of the solutions. Then on the issue of Horizon, so it's fantastic that we managed to rejoin, as the gentleman said, and what's really incredible about this is it's actually a better deal than what we had before. It's a better deal for scientists, but also a better deal for the taxpayer too. But it is the world's largest research collaboration project. And it isn't European specific. There are many nations in there that are not in the EU, and that number is expanding all the time. I think they're in talks with Korea at the moment. And one of the other things that we want to do is we did a lot of work on our Plan B, which we called Pioneer, which was a fantastic, well, I would say that, but it was a fantastic proposal of what we would do if we couldn't pull off Horizon. And there were lots of great initiatives and ideas in there that we also want to roll out over the coming years to complement Horizon.
Fantastic, thank you. We're at time, I'm afraid. Appreciate there's other questions, but it's a topic-rich debate, isn't it? I'd just like to thank all our panellists. Thank you all so much. Thank you particularly to the City of London for supporting it. Thank you very much to Michelle, Secretary of State, for coming along. Please do sign up to CPS, CapEx, Twitter and newsletters and all that sort of thing. In half an hour, the wonderful editor of CapEx, Alice Denby, is here with a topic of what have the Tories ever done for us, with Frank Luntz, Ben Houchin, Rachel Cullen.